Morning everyone and welcome to Learn With Lorna. Before I say anything else, I'm going to say my computer has just done an update which has I had deleted all my browsers, so I've got them back up and running. But if someone could, oh perfect Eleanor, I was going to say if someone could let me know that they can hear me and they can see me, that would be wonderful. And also just that if I suddenly disappear, that is why, and if that's the case, then I'll record this and put it up as soon as I possibly can. But it looks, touch wood, like it's working right now. Excellent. I'm seeing people. If I can be heard in New South Wales, then it's okay. Things are working fine. So welcome to this week's Learn With Lorna, the 47th in the series. My name's Lorna Steele and I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. A little bit of background on the service, if you haven't watched before. We have 4 archive centres across the Highlands. We have the Highland Archive and Registration Centre in Inverness, Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives in Wick, Skye and Lochaber Archive Centre in Portree, and Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William. And it is a Fort William collection we're talking about today. Before I go any further, just a reminder that the series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland and that there's no payment or subscription required, but that donations towards our work are very much appreciated, and there's a link to be able to give us a donation within the text of this Facebook film or YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube later on. Fiona, I'm seeing you say you can't hear me very clearly, but I can see that that other people can, so I'll speak up, but it looks like the sound is working. So all the previous films, as I say, this is the 47th episode in this series. All the previous films can be seen on YouTube, so please do go back and have a look at earlier episodes. And I've uploaded the next 10 onto Facebook as events, so you can have a wee look and see what's coming up in March and April. I haven't yet uploaded the rest of the year, but I've got them in my sites. So this week's Learn with Lorna is another one that is going to tie in with our February theme of education and childhood. So last week I looked at school logbooks generally as a subject. This week I'm going to look at a specific school and how school board minutes, some newspaper extracts, statistical accounts, school logbooks can all come together to tell the story of education in one place, one particular school. Next week I'll be doing something similar but a bit wider when I'm looking at education in Skye and Lochaber generally. But this week we're looking at a very specific school, looking at Fort William Primary School and Higher Grade School. Yes, to Jenny, I'm seeing that. Are you having any holidays? Yes, I'm getting married this year, so I am having a little bit of time off, but I'll still record these. So these buildings in Fort William are the buildings, for those of you who know Lochaber area, are the buildings which now comprise Charles Kennedy House, Charles Kennedy Building, and Alexander Ross House. Charles Kennedy Building now houses the Highland Council Service Point and the Fort William Registration Office. Alexander Ross House now houses Changeworks, which is a charity, Highlands and Islands Enterprise Fort William Office, and Lochaber Archive Centre. And I mentioned last week that it is such a huge privilege to have an archive centre in a building that we hold the original records for. It's really, really lovely. And of course, other of our buildings have been purpose built, have been more recent, but we hold the records for when Lochaber Archive Centre was a school, which is really nice. Just for those of you who are not from the Highlands, the reasoning for the names of the buildings as they are now, Charles Kennedy Building was named after, surprisingly, Charles Kennedy, who was the local MP for many years from 1983 through to 2015. And he was a local boy and a Lochaber High School pupil. The other building in which Lochaber Archive Centre sits is Alexander Ross House, and that's named after a very prolific Scottish architect who designed the Charles Kennedy Building. And I'm coming up in the next few weeks, doing a specific talk about Alexander Ross and his influence in the Highlands. But I wanted to start this week's by looking back a little bit at the education in the parish of Kilmallie, which is where Fort William sits. Fort William sits split across Kilmallie and Kilmaneevake. And so I wanted to start by looking back a bit at the education history in the parish of Kilmallie before we come on to focus on this one particular school. So what was there in the parish prior to the Education Act of 1872? Well, I wanted to read you an extract from the first statistical account, 1793, for Kilmallie parish, and it says this: "The parochial school is at Fort William, which, if not the most centrical place, is at least the most populous place in this parish. Here the languages and mathematics are taught. The number of scholars attending is about 150. The salary is £16, 13 shillings and 4pence, which, with the school fees, the session clerk's salary and the dues for christenings and marriages, will be about equal to £90 or £100 sterling annually. Besides this school, there are 5 others on the establishment of the Society for the Propagating of Christian Knowledge. To one of these they grant a salary of £22, to the rest £12 each. There is also a catechist employed between this and Kilmaneevake parish with a salary of £12 sterling." So that gives you an idea that before the Education Act, there were schools in the parish. There was a parochial school, some SSPCK schools, and so there is a long history, of course, of education in the area. By the time they come to the second statistical account, which was 1845, school numbers had increased, so there were more schools and there were more pupils. And it's interesting in reading the second statistical account to see not only the subjects of school subjects taught, but also the other expectations that were put on teachers. And now I know this coming from a small town. I know, and if there's any teachers who get to watch this at any stage, I'm sure you'll agree that there's quite an expectation on a teacher, as with a minister, as with a doctor, of that's being seen as being of some standing in a small community. And this can be seen within the second statistical account, which says there are now 11 schools in this parish. 1, a parochial school in Fort William, the salary at the maximum. 6 schools supported by different societies, of which 3 are supported by the Society for the Propagating Christian Knowledge. 4 schools supported by private individuals. The branches generally taught in the parochial school, and in that supported by the Committee of the General Assembly at Corpach, are English, reading, writing, arithmetic, Latin, Greek, bookkeeping, geography. The fees of the parochial school may amount to about £50 per annum, but the teacher has to pay an assistant. The Society's schoolmaster's income may be from £16 to £25 per annum, including school fees, which are not well paid in general. The Gaelic schools have conferred no small benefit on this parish. They have been instrumental in introducing the word of God into families where it was not before, and the teachers in general, being persons of a serious cast of mind, have been a check upon the prevailing sins of the area of drunkenness, swearing, and Sabbath profanation. So a huge expectation on teachers who need to be behaving well at all times and upholding the morals of the town. Leslie, parochial school, it means that it is the school which is kind of sponsored by and run by the parish, so linked in with the church. So the church obviously very heavily involved in education prior to the Education Act. Now, a key date, of course, for education in Scotland, and I say of course because I have banged on about it so much in for so many weeks, is the 1872 Education Scotland Act. Now that is the equivalent to the 1870 Education Act in England, and I know that I refer to it quite frequently, but it's a very key date in the changing system of education in Scotland. So the Education Act, much like the Poor Relief Act, if you remember me talking about that, established a board of education for Scotland in Edinburgh, so a central board, and then local school boards to oversee the primary and secondary education in each area. The Act made primary and elementary education compulsory, and it standardised the way teachers were appointed and the way teachers were employed and the contracts that they came under. And in many parishes, many local school boards started their kind of takeover of that area with a summary of taking assessment of what the educational state of the parish was already. So what schools already exist and what's the state of them. And Kilmally Parish did that exact thing, and the school board minutes for Kilmally record this. And there's a huge, huge amount of information in this one. So 1873 entry in the school board minutes says that the population of the whole area is 4,071, that the area covers 256,000 acres, that there are 685 children between the ages of 5 and 13 in the area, of whom 437 are in attendance at school. So there's 36% of the children in the area are not attending school, whether they're on the roll or not, and there's about 100 difference between the pupils who are even on the roll. The church referred to would be the Church of Scotland, the established church. Okay, so this then goes on to list the 15 schools by this point that are in the area. And it's really interesting, you'll see as I read through this, why there was kind of felt to be a need for standardisation. So there are 15 schools. Kilmally Parish School in Fort William, the Parliamentary School in Onich, the Scottish Society for Propagating of Christian Knowledge Schools, which I'm only going to say one more time, so SSPCK schools can be found at Frieslig, Blake, Garvan, Corribeg and Cornavard Gower. So, and I'm not from the area, so apologies if I'm pronouncing anything wrong here. And for the person who told me a few weeks ago that their cat went wild with my accent, I do apologise, because you're going to get a lot of place names coming up. There are Ladies Gaelic Association schools at Achnacarry, an infant school at Onich, at Blarmachfaldach, Fort William Infant School. So a range of those as well. There are General Assembly schools at Corpach and at Locharkig, and denominational schools at Fort William and Onich. So you can see there a huge diversity in the type of education, the things people are being taught, who's in control of the system, a huge amount of variation in that. And that was why the Education Act aimed to standardise a lot of these things. But this entry in the school board minutes contains a huge amount of information about each of these schools. So for each one, we get details of the length and breadth and height and area of the classroom. Condition of the school, is it in bad condition? Is it in perfect condition? The number and gender of the teachers, how many rooms each school can accommodate, how many pupils each room can accommodate properly, how many on the roll and how many are in attendance. And so, for example, Kilmally Parish Church in Fort William had 142 pupils on the roll, and 128 of those were in attendance, so quite a high percentage. Whereas the elementary school in Onich, it says it could accommodate 50, it had one male teacher, but there were no pupils in attendance and no pupils even on the roll, which makes you wonder. It'll tell you if each school is just elementary education or if it provides higher education, and also the distance that each school is to the next school. So you can see that they're taking an assessment of how they're going to kind of consolidate this. Do we need schools every 2 miles, or is there a way we can combine schools? So very, very interesting and useful. And the one thing that it also shows you is that the vast majority of these pupils are being taught across schools in Fort William. After the Education Act of 1872, a lot of these schools, as I say, were taken over or consolidated, put together, but many more were built. And for anyone in Britain who has an image of a school building, a typical school building in their head, those are probably school buildings that were constructed after the Education Act in whichever country you're in. What we now know as the Charles Kennedy building, which was Fort William Higher Grade School, was one of those that was built after the Act. So it was built in 1875, just along the road on Akintor Road from where the previous school had been. And it was built to a design, as I mentioned, by the very prolific and well-known Scottish architect Alexander Ross. who I'll come on to talk about in a later episode, also designed many different schools and buildings, Inverness Cathedral, St Andrew's Cathedral, lots of things. Lochiel, who was the chairman of the school board, and of course I spoke about him in the Cameron of Lochiel episode, he laid the foundation stone. And the Oban Times reported the event on the 17th of April 1875, and I've got the extract here to read to you. Before I do that, Leslie, yes, teachers were recruited in different ways. So some came in as pupil teachers, worked their way up through the school, and then went on to train. But there's also a lot of references to advertising within newspapers, local and regional and national newspapers for teachers. And you can quite often see where they've come from and where they're going, where they leave to go to. Okay, so this is the Oban Times 1875. New School. The foundation stone of Fort William School was laid on Tuesday by Donald Cameron of Lochiel, MP. The old grammar school had been found too small for the requirements of the Education Act. The principal shops and other places of business were closed, and the weather being favourable, a large number of people assembled to witness the proceedings. And the local volunteer corps, under the command of Captain McLeish and Lieutenant Affleck, turned out as a guard of honour. Prayer was offered by the Reverend Dr. Clark of Kilmally. After the foundation stone was laid with the usual formalities, Lochiel addressed those present, and in the course of his remarks said that the stone now laid was, if not the first, at least one of the first laid in the county. Although 2 years had elapsed since the board first met, it was only in December last that the plans had been sanctioned by the Scotch Education Department. Mr. Jolly, Inspector of Schools, complimented Lochiel on the excellence of the arrangements for the new school, and he said he believed that the present building would produce, like the old school, scholars of whom not only Lochaber but Scotland would be proud. He concluded by complimenting Mr. Ross, the architect, on the excellence of his plans, and he had no doubt the contractor, Mr. Doig, would make his own share of the undertaking worthy of his name. The building, which is situated at the west end of Fort William, is well advanced. When completed, it will cost somewhere over £2,500. The situation is one of the finest in the locality and commands an excellent sea view. And for any of you who know it, I can confirm it most certainly does. Our view from Lochaber Archive Centre is absolutely stunning. And I hope when we've finished this talk today, you'll go and have a wee look at some pictures of the building. It's absolutely stunning and great location. So the school logbook for the time reveals that the pupils, who were of course attending school just down the road, were given a day off. They were given a holiday to go along and attend the laying of the stone ceremony. And it says that they all turned out in bulk. I mentioned last week how interesting and useful HMI reports can be, His Majesty's Inspectors of Schools reports. And I wanted to share a bit of the report from 1877 with you. This one's interesting because it opens with a summary of the pupils. So it says that there are 121 boys and 104 girls in attendance. And it gives a list of the teaching staff, which is often very useful for people who are researching, trying to find relatives, ancestors. And so the teaching staff are listed as C. Livingston, John Mackenzie, Margaret Campbell, B.M. Burrell, Christina Cameron, and the HMI, the inspector himself, is J. MacLeod. So this is an extract from the 1877 Inspector's Report. It says, writing sheets should be supplied to the infant room and also a press. This school is conducted with very good ability, excellent manner, and corresponding results are produced. Arithmetic of the second standard is very good, reading and grammar good, meanings fair. I'm reading this like it's the shipping forecast. Dictation very good. Reading of the third standard excellent. Meanings and grammar very good. Arithmetic excellent. Dictation very good. Reading of the fourth standard good. Arithmetic and dictation very good. Reading and arithmetic of the fifth and sixth standards good. Dictation very good. History and geography of the fourth standard very good. More should give correct answers in the fifth and sixth standards. Latin first year good. Translation and quantities very good in the third year, but a little bit behind. Verse is a little bit behind. Physical geography good. Mathematics, one boy good, the rest moderate. Mr. Mackenzie, the male assistant teacher, teaches in an earnest and vigorous manner and does very good work. The infant department is under the charge of Miss Campbell, who conducts it with much efficiency. Order and tone are very good and the children are happy. The first standard did very well, especially in arithmetic. The reading was fluent, excellent from a few, good from the youngest. The gallery lessons were well given, but they had evidently received less attention than they deserve on account of the time which is necessarily given to the first standard. So the reason I wanted to read that out very much in the manner of the shipping forecast was because it demonstrates the wide range of ages who are being taught in this school. So talking there about the infant department, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth standards all being taught in this complex of buildings on the site. And that's something that continued to be a feature throughout the life of the buildings. The higher grade school was there, the secondary school was there, the primary school was there. And I don't know if anyone watching attended when any of those schools were still in that place, but if you do have any memories of it, please throw them into the comments, whichever of the 4 pages you're watching on, and let us know. A reminder before I go into the next century that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in the Learn With Lorna series of talks. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're very, very grateful for those who are able to do that. Yes, Linda, this is the school that was derelict for years, so we'll come on to that in a second. So I mentioned last week that the huge impact that epidemics can have on education, and I wanted to read a short extract from 1884 as the school dealt with the threat of scarlet fever. It's just interesting, you know, the comparisons with now. So this says, the clerk stated that he had called this meeting without the usual warning of 8 days in consequence of a communication he had received from Dr. McIntyre that there are several cases of scarlet fever in Fort William, and containing a suggestion that the school should be shut forthwith for about 10 days. The board approved of the calling of the meeting, as has been done, and so they resolved to close the school for a week from this date upon getting the usual medical certificate. And then they go on to say that they'll take any other steps that are considered necessary to stop this happening. And there's a later reference as well to the Spanish flu, when as far as I can see, they closed it as a preventative measure. They shut the school as they saw it travelling around the country. They just shut it so that it was prevented from coming in too much. So you remember that I mentioned that the pupils were given a holiday to attend the laying of the foundation stone of their new school. And there's loads of things like that throughout these logbooks. Loads of happy events appear. So for instance, in 1911, on June the 21st, and the entry reads, "Closed this evening for the summer vacation. Tomorrow the pupils are to be treated to sports in the town park and tea in the town hall in honour of the coronation of King George V." So there's lots of things like that through these records of local market days, local landowners getting married, Christmas treats, things like that. But throughout the school logbooks and the school board minutes, you also get a real idea of the challenges of running a school, of finding and keeping teachers, of the upkeep of buildings, of the requirements to things like those epidemics. How do you legislate for them? How do you work around them? Getting supplies, maintaining discipline, maintaining education standards, living up to the expectations of the HMI every time the inspectors come out, trying to keep your standard up. All those things which will still be completely a focus for teachers at the moment. And I mentioned that there's reference to the Spanish flu pandemic. There's also references to a measles outbreak in 1917, which requires all rooms and corridors in both schools to be thoroughly disinfected. So again, that kind of link, there's nothing new under the sun. There's a pandemic, it's an epidemic come round, they've had to close the school, either as a preventative method or to clean it to prevent anything getting worse. In that entry, it refers to both schools, and that's because the second building, which we now know as Alexander Ross House, where Lochaber Archive Centre is situated, had by now been constructed, and so they talk about both schools. Now, I've spoken previously about the impact of conflict on education, the impact of the world wars. And there's 2 extracts here from the school board minutes that I wanted to share with you that that illustrate this in a different way. Last week I spoke about former pupils losing their lives in conflict. These show the impact on education of them trying to maintain standards education while so many people are away fighting. So the first extract is from 1915. It was ascertained that out of the 40 pupils who had at the beginning of the present session enrolled in the first year of the higher grade department, only 3 were prepared to take Gaelic. Further, from the information before them, the committee is satisfied that the teaching of Gaelic would involve more particularly in the second and third years the services of an additional teacher. So none of the teachers who are there are either able to take it on through knowledge or through time. The school staff is at present depleted by the absence on military duty of Mr. Fairweather and owing to the regrettable illness of Miss Duncan. In consequence, the staff is just equal to the demands of the teaching requirements of the school as it is at present arranged. To add another subject such as Gaelic to the scheme of teaching would be impossible with the present staff, or at all events, would seriously impair the whole work of the school. And again, I just think that's very current to the things that we're dealing with everybody going, we're doing the best we can in the circumstances. We're dealing with a very unusual situation, but also the impact that those decisions have. If those children didn't have that opportunity, where does that leave them? Which again, I think is something very, very current. People are doing the best they can, but there's awareness that there may be long-term consequences of decisions. So that extract mentioned Mr. Fairweather, the teacher, and the second one I wanted to read to you is from 1919. And this says, submitted the letter from Miss Fairweather, Leith, to the chairman, stating that it was the express wish of her brother, Mr. Primrose Fairweather, unusual name, who was assistant master at the higher grade school here and who was presumed to have been killed in action in France on the 1st of July 1916, to present a bookcase with almost 50 volumes of masterpieces to the school library for the use of the pupils, and she was accordingly sending the same by passenger train, and she hoped that the board would be pleased to accept the gift. Miss Fairweather also offered to send a photograph of her brother to the school to accompany it. So again, this just the legacy of that conflict. Not only have they lost a teacher, and the staff and the pupils need to come to terms with that, but the legacy that the bookcase was given, and so the person remains part of the school story. So moving into the 1940s, we start to see again this constant impact that I've referred to of the high numbers of pupils and the wide age range. And this is an extract from the school inspector's report of 1941-42, which talks about the impact that these numbers were having. It also starts by saying that during the war, the staff and pupils have done notable work worthy of being recorded, which is a nice thing to note. So this extract from 41-42 says, the national situation, this is for the primary division initially, the national situation and the industrial development of this town have brought about an increase in this primary roll to 300. Evacuees in this part of the school number 62, drawn from all parts of the kingdom. Their enrolment presented for a time some difficulties in organisation, but they now fit harmoniously into their surroundings, and their stay is likely to be of value to themselves and to the school. The strain on accommodation has led to changes in the infant timetable and the renting of an external hall in which to put primary 3. So that's the primary department. Then for the general report of the school, it goes on to say, this important and growing secondary school has been very much handicapped during the past few years for lack of sufficient and suitable accommodation. The war has unfortunately postponed consideration of the plans envisaged to improve and extend the accommodation, and various temporary measures have had to be resorted to in order to alleviate the difficulties that have presented themselves from time to time. At present, 2 of the rooms in the small boys' hostel are used as classrooms, and the secondary classrooms themselves suffer from considerable congestion. The secondary roll is now 269, of whom 21 are evacuees, as compared with 117 9 years ago. No fewer than 101 pupils arrive by bus and train, all of whom are unable to go home for lunch. There is thus much need for a provision of a hot midday meal at this school, and in the circumstances of the locality, it will be no easy matter for the authority to arrange for the additional accommodation that will be required for that purpose. As to the urgency of it, there can be no question. Notwithstanding the strains and stresses of the past 3 years, this school has functioned with clear success, and to this end the headmaster and his willing staff have applied themselves with much skill. So you get the idea of the urgency and the fact that the inspector is saying, we're coming to a crisis point here with the amount of people that are crammed into these buildings. And there were extensions over the years. As I say, Alexander Ross House, as is now, was built. There was also extensions in 1948. There were sort of cabins put outside. There was a hall built. But really the main thing was resolved in 1960, which was the opening of Lochaber High School. Brand new Lochaber High School, situated at Camagale. And again, when you come off this, if you're not familiar with the area, have a quick look at Lochaber High School. They moved from one fantastic location overlooking the water to another fantastic location with Ben Nevis as a backdrop. They're absolutely beautiful. And so the secondary department relocated to the new Lochaber High School, and leaving just the primary department on the site of complex buildings that we're talking about. There's a lovely extract about this in the school logbook, and I don't know if anyone attended this school and has any memories of this. 1960. This is the school logbook talking about the move to the new building. The headmaster spent much of the afternoon on Wednesday at the new secondary school building with a view to easing the arrangements for flitting articles from the new school beginning that day. I love the fact that they've used the kind of colloquial word flitting in this sort of official document. Flitting of certain furniture and equipment was begun on Thursday and continued all that day on Friday under the supervision of Mr. McKinnon, Deputy Headmaster. Boys and girls of the senior classes 4, 5 and 6 did a magnificent piece of work by their help and their willing cooperation over this period. Without the cooperation of the staff and pupils in a difficult job, the flitting would have been a much more trying ordeal. The headmaster took charge of the new building where the workmen were still all busy. Most of the rooms in the old building were short of furniture, school was closed in the afternoon at 3 p.m. when the staff travelled over to the new building. The present school continues as a primary school only, and from now on this logbook will refer to it alone. And then it goes on again just to acknowledge the help of the pupils and the fact that this the department was moved over, the senior department moved over to Lochaber High School with the help of the pupils, which is just a nice extract. But of course, over the years, again, the primary school, as it was then, also outgrew the site, and eventually the primary school was split between that complex and a new site up at Upper Achentor, and then what is now the Charles Kennedy building, which was the secondary department, fell gradually into more and more disrepair. So eventually the building was scheduled for demolition, but it was saved by a local group who were so keen that this iconic building in the town should be preserved. It was category B listed in 1996, and of course thenceforth its future was kind of secured a bit more. There was a merger between Upper Achentor Primary, Fort William Primary School and Fort William Roman Catholic Primary School, and that resulted in the construction of the brand new state-of-the-art Londivra Primary in Fort William in 2015, and I have been in there and it is an absolutely lovely school. It's really, really nice. And so with that, all pupils had left the area. It had left that original complex of buildings, and it was then open to be developed in 2015, I think it started, but certainly finished in 2018, the development of the buildings on the site. And it became, as I say, Charles Kennedy Building, which is Highland Council Service Point and Registration Office, and then Alexander Ross House, housing Highlands and Islands Enterprise, Changeworks, and Lochaber Archive Centre. It's a beautiful, beautiful, sympathetic restoration of the building. It won awards. It does a great tribute to the history of the building, so please do have a look at it. But what I love is, there are new stories being created in these new school buildings. And of course, there are other schools in Fort William and around the area. But the stories that have always been part of education in the area, they just continue in a new site. So there are still new stories, new generations learning things in the new buildings. And the old building is restored absolutely beautifully. And so please do have a look. There's a great film that I was watching yesterday on YouTube that Robertson put up of the construction of the building and things that they paid particular attention to when they were restoring it. So please do have a look for that. And as I say, it's a fantastic site for us now in Fort William, and lovely to be in a building that you have some records for, and you look around you and think about the pupils and teachers that have gone through it. So thank you very much for joining me to have a look at the history of Fort William School. Next week is the final one in the Education and Childhood series. So I'll be looking at education in Skye and Lochalsh. Again, using different types of records to see what we can learn about how education developed and changed in Skye and Lochalsh over hundreds of years. So I hope you can join me for that. March's theme going forward will be stories and illustrations. So I'm excited about that because everything we have is stories. Everything we have in all of our collections is just stories of people and places. And so I hope you can join me for the talks in March as well. Please do have a look on Facebook events. They're all up there. If you've been interested in this and in education generally, then please do have a look at our catalogues. Our catalogues are online, so you can see what we hold to do with this subject. And also our new series of classes are coming up in March, and there's an education-specific one of those classes. I think they are almost fully booked, so if you do want to go on to them, please contact us quite quickly. And the address for that is archives@highlifehighland.com. So I hope you can join me next week. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there's no payment or subscription required to take part in these talks. But if you're able to donate towards our work, we would really be most grateful. Thank you.